What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 33 deadline, which, don't forget, is today. So this video is going to go live a few hours later. It's going to be the Game Week 33 deadline. It's 6 PM UK time, so don't miss that. We're going to start off by talking about the Bruno Fernandes injury. We know he picked up a knock to his ankle in the FA Cup semi-final. He did kind of play through it, but he came off in the first half of extra time. And then this image got posted last night. So this was apparently put up on his wife's Instagram page. And as you can see, there's kind of something around his foot. He's got it raised as well, so possibly that's swelling. There's a protective boot on the floor. There's crutches as well. The issue is, we don't know exactly how bad that injury is. We don't know how long he might be out for. I know everyone suddenly becomes a doctor when all these images are posted, and he's definitely going to be out for 33, he's definitely going to be out for 34. We don't 100% know that yet. The issue is the deadline is today, and we're not going to hear from Ten Hag until tomorrow because the Man United game isn't until Thursday. So what I would say is, if you are someone that has been looking to get rid of Bruno Fernandes anyway, this is probably the push you need. If you've got a good route to Salah, then that seems like a pretty good transfer. Outside of that, most people have got a pretty good bench this week. So I don't know if there's a huge rush to get rid of him before Spurs away, because if he is back for Game Week 34, then I still think he's a really good option for the rest of the season. I don't think there's this huge rush to get rid of him this week. If you're kind of stuck where you don't have a good bench, and you want to make the move, then absolutely just go through with it. We're going to talk about midfielders later on, but it doesn't look good, right? I'm not a doctor either, but you'd have to say he's in doubt to play that Spurs game. It is a little bit unlucky, I would say, if you've bought Fernandes, especially if you jumped on Man United players back in Game Week 29, because Rashford's missed games, Shaw's missed games, and obviously now Fernandes is a doubt as well. Just to put it into perspective about how many games Fernandes played, or plays, if you go on Transfer Market and look up his injury record, he's missed games through injury/illness 3 times in his whole career, and 2 of those times were illness. So in terms of injuries, he's only missed games once through injury, and that's it. So even if he's out for Spurs, I wouldn't put it past him to be fine for Villa and then play every single game for the rest of the season, because that's just the kind of player that he is. That's why I'm saying there's not a huge rush to get rid of him. I'm going to talk about my team later because I've got him. I am thinking about selling, but I don't think it's something that I'm definitely going to do this week. So yeah, Bruno Fernandes is not looking good. Unfortunately, unless some journalists come out with more information today, we're probably not going to find out anything else before the deadline for FPL. So I've been counting up the amount of times this week I've been asked, can you make a Game Week 33 wildcard draft video? And it's precisely 23,427. And I'm now thinking, if I had to do a second take of this section of the video, would I pick a different number? Possibly. Anyway, there's not enough time to do a separate video, so we're including it in this one. Just a few notes first of all. If you've got your bench boost left, then it's probably worth using that in Game Week 34, in which case you'll need to wildcard this week. If you still have triple captain as well, it's not an ideal situation, but there are more double game weeks to come after 34 that you could look to use it in. If you don't have the bench boost to worry about and your team doesn't look great for 33, then obviously you can still decide to wildcard this week. You might just not need to put as much money on the bench. If your team looks good for 33 and you don't have any other chips to worry about, then I would probably save the wildcard until 34 to give yourself as much information ahead of the next double game week. Because obviously there's points to be gained this week, when the majority are going to come from 34 onwards. So if your team looks good for 33, no bench boost or triple captain to worry about, I'd probably just wildcard in Game Week 34 instead. Now, if you are wildcarding this week, the key teams you're going to be looking at are just these 5. And the numbers in brackets are the amount of double game weeks they have left for the rest of the season. So you're mostly going to be building your team for players from Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Brighton and Newcastle. The only thing to think about is the goalkeeper on bench boost. Now, I know people are going to hate this, but if I was wildcarding this week, I would probably choose Ederson as my main goalkeeper, because Man City got some really nice fixtures, 2 double game weeks, etc. And if you accompany that with someone like De Gea, That looks good for bench boost in 34, but when you get to game week 37, Man United, Man City and Brighton are all going to double again. And so if you wanted 6 players from Man United and Man City, which you might not want, but if you did, having 2 of their goalkeepers with no bench boost is not going to be that useful. So I'd probably be looking at like someone like Fabianski, Leno, Pope or Alisson instead. Obviously Pope and Alisson a little bit more expensive, but Alisson only doubles in 34 anyway, and Pope doubles in 36. So it wouldn't be the end of the world putting them with Ederson. Or you go Fabianski or Leno if you want someone a bit cheaper, just to use them for the bench boost only. So that's a couple of things to think about. This is kind of the short list. So for Liverpool, Alisson, Salah, Trent, Robertson, Van Dijk. Obviously, if you've got the money, you just go to Trent. If not, you could go to Robertson or Van Dijk. Konate is a cheap option as well if you want to go for double Liverpool defence, but you don't have the money for Trent and Robertson. And I'd maybe look at Gakpo. The only reason I've not got Jota on the list is because when I've kind of gone through and built a team, I just think for nearly 9 million, he becomes a bit too expensive. And for what it's worth, I probably wouldn't wildcard into Gakpo either. But because of his price, if Fernandes is injured and you don't really fancy a Man City midfielder, there's not a huge amount of other options that also double in 34. So Gakpo at that point would become like a bit of a default pick. But that's why Gakpo's on there and not Jota. I think Jota is a worthwhile punt if you can afford it. But I think for most people when they start building the teams, especially if you're going for 2, decently priced goalkeepers, it becomes a bit tricky. For Man City, I'll probably be looking at Ederson, Diaz if you need a defender, Grealish if you want a midfielder, and obviously Haaland up front. Some people have started talking about Alvarez. I just don't think he'll get enough minutes. Mahrez, there's always the issue of Bernardo Silva. In fact, for the Arsenal game, I think Bernardo Silva will probably start. So I just wouldn't go for Mahrez. And in defence, Diaz just seems the most nailed on right now. Stones is a great option playing in midfield. But I do think Pep worries about his injuries more than any other player in that defence. So if anyone's going to get brought off before the 60th minute, as we've already seen, it's going to be him. Newcastle is pretty easy. Pope, Trippier, Schär and Botman. Obviously, depending on what your cash situation is like, there's no harm in putting Botman on that bench boost for Southampton at home. But if you've got the money and he's fit, I would go for Schär instead. And obviously, Isak up front. I do think there's a slight chance that Isak will be benched either in 33 or 34. The only thing I'm basing that on is what happened in game week 29. So he's played a lot of matches recently. The only time he was benched was when there was 2 games in quick succession, double game week 29. Well, that's about to happen again. So you've had Spurs game, midweek 33, weekend 34. He might be benched for one of those 2 games. It's the only slight issue, but because of the good fixtures they've got, and how many minutes he's getting generally, and the double in 36, which I guess, again, could be a little bit of a risk, I'd probably still think about including him. Brighton, it's really just the 3 midfielders, McAllister, March, Matoma, and then 2 defenders, Estupiñán and Dunk. There's too many injuries in the forward line, and we don't know how long they're going to be out for. So even if you punted for one now, another one might be back later. And with the goalkeepers, I just wouldn't risk it. I just don't think there's enough value. There is a lot of value there if Steele's the number 1, but what if Sanchez plays a game at some point? It's just not worth the risk, I think. There's enough money to go around to get better goalkeepers. And then for United, I think if you're wildcarding this week, Fernandes is quite expensive to fit in, especially if you want a bench boost in 34. And obviously there are doubts there about whether he's going to start. So I think it's De Gea in goal, Luke Shaw the most nailed defender. I wouldn't even look at any of the Man United defenders personally. And obviously Rashford. Martial, maybe, but I think the minute you put him in, he's probably going to get injured. Yes, I know, you don't care about all the notes and the shortlist and stuff like that. You just want to see the draft. Now, I will say, I'm not wildcarding this week, and it's a very quick turnaround between game weeks 32 and 33, so I probably haven't put as much thought into it as someone would if they were actually on a wildcard, but I also think for the most part, it just picks itself. So let's go through the obvious choices first of all. So Haaland would definitely be in. I would probably include Ederson, because I do like the fixtures they've got. I'm just a little bit worried about rotation because of the Champions League for other players. There's always a chance that Ederson could get benched, but it's very unlikely. I would probably still include Trippier because it's Southampton at home in 34 and you've got the double in 36. Most people have got money built up in him as well. Rashford would definitely be in. I'd also include 2 Brighton midfielders. You can choose if you want McAllister instead. I think we've talked about which are the best Brighton midfielders so much, and it's probably going to come up again later on in the video. I do think without Fernandes, there is a case to be made to potentially go triple Brighton midfielders and not go for a defender, because outside of Rashford and obviously Salah would have to be in as well. I don't think any other midfielders are must-have. I know people really like Grealish right now, and I agree. He's a good pick. He probably will come into my team next week if Fernandes is out injured, but I don't think he's must-have by any means. I think because of the Champions League games, even he will probably miss a game at some point, in which case if you wanted to have a third Brighton midfielder in there instead of Grealish, I think that's perfectly viable. But for this, I'm just going to put Grealish in because most people are going to want him. For the second goalkeeper, it really depends how much money you've got to go around. It might be a good option to have someone like Alisson in there for the bench boost if you're happy to only have 2 Arsenal players for kind of the rest of the season playing, like someone like Trent and Salah, and I might as well put Trent in here actually. But for most people, they're not going to have that much money spare. So I'm going to put Botman as well in for the bench boost. I probably would include Isak, even though I've got slight worries about him this week. I think if you look at the Newcastle fixtures, like good fixture this week, good fixture next week for the bench boost. Arsenal at home is difficult in 35, but they are conceding goals right now. And a home game for Newcastle is pretty solid. So they can probably get at least a goal against Arsenal there. Then you've got the double of Leeds away, Brighton at home in 36. So I think even if you don't include him, and there is an argument to be made to start with Watkins instead and then transfer him to Isak in 36 once we see what kind of rotation around the short turnaround times are. But again, Watkins is a lot more expensive. He is, let me just check here, 7.7. So you're paying nearly $1 million more, which obviously if you don't start with that, you can spread it around your team instead. So I would probably just take the risk on Isak. And then who else have we got to fit? So we've got 4 more spots for 21 million. I'm just going to put Fabianski in goal for now. So their double in 34 for the bench boost is Palace away and Man City away. It's not ideal, and if you've got more money, you could potentially go for Pope instead. But then you'd have to get rid of one of the defenders. So Fabianski and Botman or Pope and a West Ham defender. I'd probably rather go this way round and have less money in my goalkeeper spots, but it's completely up to you. I think I would still include Luke Shaw. I think Fernandes being out, something I maybe didn't discuss, is not necessarily great for the team overall, but I think there's plenty of fixtures in here, like Villa at home, for example, potential clean sheet, West Ham away, Wolves at home, Bournemouth away. That game week 37 is a double game week as well, and it's Fulham at home, last game of the season. So I think I would back the Man United defence and still have them in. I would want triple Brighton, 3 double game weeks, I just wouldn't get rid of it. But by the way, I completely realise this is mostly just my team with a few tweaks, but that is what we've been building towards, right? We knew when we got to 34, the wildcards would be very similar to the teams the rest of us have been building. I would probably have a goalkeeper, then you've got kind of 6.7 to spend up front. And I would probably go with Solanke. You could risk Martial if you wanted to, like something like that, and have the triple Man United, Martial, Rashford, Luke Shaw. And look, if Martial, maybe that's kind of worth it, right? Because he's got a double game week in 34. You just take the risk that he's going to stay fit. And when he inevitably gets injured, you can either move him on to Solanke, you can move him down to Greenwood if you need the money, or you could just leave him to kind of rot on the bench. I think if Fernandes is out, for what it's worth, unless you're going to go for De Gea in goal, I don't know if a Man United triple up is even needed, to be honest with you. So you could pump for someone like Martial, or you just get Solanke. And I guess I would go with a team like that-ish. I mean, if you wanted to move it around a bit, you could have McAllister in here instead. And instead of Estepinian, you could have Robertson if you wanted to go double Liverpool defence instead. Again, Martial could be a bit cheaper if you've got money issues. And in game week 34 for the bench boost, Solanke's got Leeds at home. So it's not the end of the world. You are going to be mostly bench boosting with single game week players. But I don't think it's a huge issue because part of building this team is obviously what it's also going to get you after that, right? So Brighton loads more doubles, same for Man City, Man United, etc. So I don't think it's a huge problem that, Botman, Trippier, Isak and Solanke have all got single game weeks. But like I said, if you've got the money, then you probably just take the risk on someone like Martial. I'm laughing because I just know he's going to get injured. That's the only issue with him. And if you don't have the money, you can just get rid of Robertson to someone cheaper. You could even go all the way down to Konate. Like he started, unless he gets injured, he looks like he's going to continue to start. He started like the last 8 games. So I think it's something like that-ish. But again, I'm not wildcarding, so let me know down below if you think there's anything major I've missed. Like I said, most people are just going to go for Grealish in midfield, in which case I would pick up a Brighton defender instead, Estepinian or Dunk. Otherwise, it's fairly simple. Man City, Liverpool, Man United, Brighton and Newcastle, they're the main 5 teams to be thinking about. Okay, so is Trent essential or is Robertson a good option still? I wouldn't label many players right now as essential, apart from maybe Haaland. And obviously Trent has gone up in price again this week, so I think he's 7.5 million. So for some teams, it is going to start to be a struggle to get him in. So there's no harm in going for someone a little bit cheaper if you wanted to, like Robertson instead. The main issue with Robertson, I suppose, is Trent is moving into midfield, so Robertson's kind of forming a back 3 in left centre-back, similar to how Man City play. But there are still going to be times where he gets forward. He's on some set pieces as well, so I don't think it's the end of the world to go for him instead. But let's not pretend. If money's no object, you're absolutely picking Trent instead. So if you've got the money for him and you're still able to do all the other moves you want, then Trent is the one you should be picking. The only thing I would say, because I know there's going to be lots to talk about in this week and definitely next week, and it's going to feel like there's a fear of missing out, the only silver line I can give you if you're not looking to go for Trent or a Liverpool defender at all is a lot of people are going to have benching headaches soon, right? So if you think about my team, for example, and don't just ignore Fernandes for now, I'll talk about him later. Let's say this is the defence I've got and I end up bringing in Trent for Chilwell, which was the original plan. Well, in game week 34, I'd obviously play Trent. In game week 35, they've got Brentford at home. Now, I would not be worried about playing Trent in that game, but do I think there's a possibility of Brentford scoring given how well they've attacked this year and how poorly for a lot of the season Liverpool have defended? Possibly. So you could use that as a reason not to get a Liverpool defender. And in game week 36, Newcastle defenders have got Leeds away and Brighton at home. So I'm definitely going to play Trippier and Botman. And Estepinian also has a double as well. And because lots of my attackers are also really good options, I'm going to want to play 3-5-2 almost certainly that week, which then means benching Trent for Leicester away. Now again, Leicester are always a team I would expect to score anyway, but it's not really a fixture most of us would consider benching Trent in. So we might kind of hit him in game week 34, happy to play him in 35, but in game week 36, depending on how the rest of your team is set up, you might have to bench him anyway. And in game week 37, again, and this is all going to be very team dependent, Man City are going to double again. And for my team, I've only got Edison and Haaland. So if I do end up getting Salah in, for example, then I've got a spare Man City slot. And I'm probably going to want a third for that double in 37, depending on what's happening with Champions League. So at which point, my easiest route for someone that's not also already doubling that week is to sell Trent or to sell Salah. And I know right now which one I would probably prefer to do. And as you can imagine, it's not to sell Salah. So it could be a case that Trent comes in 34 for the double, played against Brentford at home, benched in 36, and sold or benched in game week 37. So I would absolutely get into a transfer planner. I know I keep saying this, but it's really important over the next few weeks, and see how often you're actually going to play him with the transfers that you've got planned. So is he essential? No. Is he one of the best Is he the best defender option in game week 34? Yes. Robertson's still good though if you need to go someone a little bit cheaper. I know what you're thinking, how on earth is he talking about the 5 midfielders again? But to be fair, the questions keep coming in. Obviously, people are either wildcarding this week or they're looking to build their teams for 34 onwards. So let's just quickly go through it. If you're not interested, obviously, you can just skip to the next section anyway. If you could pick any 5 midfielders for game week 34 and beyond, who would they be? So I split them into 2 sections, right? You've got the 5 players on the left, Salah, Rashford, March, Mitoma and McAllister. And then the 2 players on the right, Grealish and Fernandes. And obviously things have changed a little bit compared to my original plan at least, because Fernandes is now a doubt for Spurs away in game week 33 and perhaps beyond. So this is what I would say. If I was building the perfect midfield for 34, I would pick at least 4, maybe even all 5 of the 5 players on the left. So I would definitely have Salah, I would definitely have Rashford, and I would have at least 2 Brighton midfielders. Now, right now, I've got March and Mitoma in my team. You could absolutely put McAllister in instead of March or Mitoma if you wanted to. Veltman's now back, so he should move to right back. Gross will come into kind of more of that defensive midfield position, which allows McAllister to play as a number 10. They've obviously got Enciso there, so he might play some games and McAllister might move back. Even if it's not from the start of games, it could be during during the game, but he's still on penalty. So pick whichever 2 you want, or you could go for all 5. And for what it's worth, I think every Brighton midfielder is better than Jack Grealish as an option from now until the end of the season, because I just don't really see much rotation for Brighton at all. So unless you're desperate to get a Man City midfielder in there, if you've not already got a Brighton defender and it doesn't work into your transfer strategy to bring one in, I think it's fine to go for that triple up. So at least 4, maybe 5 of the ones on the left, and then I would go for 1 of the 2 on the right. And obviously if Fernandes is injured, it's got to be Grealish. And I don't fancy Mahrez or Gundogan as an option. I personally think De Bruyne is too expensive right now, because Haaland for me is non-negotiable, and Salah is definitely, in my eyes at least, a better pick than De Bruyne. So there's just not enough money to go around for most people to also get him as well. There's not really any other midfielders I'm looking at, apart from potentially Gakpo, and I'm not convinced he's a better option than Grealish anyway. I mean, he has started a lot of games recently, and his price is quite good, and Liverpool's fixtures are decent, and even though Man City have got an extra double game week, if they're going to miss one of those games, then you could say Gakpo's minutes are quite similar to Grealish anyway. But I think these are the main 7 I would be looking at. Outside shot are going for Gakpo instead. So 4 or 5 at the left, then either 1 of the 2 on the right if you need someone else. And that's what I'll be looking at. So are Arsenal players worth having now, given their fixtures until the end of the season? And I would say for most people, especially if you're not free hitting in game week 34, they're probably not worth having, especially the midfielders. Because if you think about the question I've just answered, who are the best 5 midfielders for game week 34 onwards, none of the players I'm considering were Arsenal players. And it's not that they've just become really bad value, far from it. I just think there's 5 better players to fill those slots. If you are free hitting in 34, it's maybe a little bit different, because you could maybe bench them this week or just play them against Man City if you have to. 34 doesn't matter because you're free hitting anyway. And after that, Newcastle away, Brighton at home, Forest away, Wolves at home. It's not that bad of a fixture run. You wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to target Newcastle away and Brighton at home, but given how good Arsenal players have been so far this season, you probably wouldn't worry about it either. But for anyone that's not free hitting, so you've already used it, I think they're worth starting to think about getting rid, basically. Doesn't have to be this week. For example, I might not get rid of Odegaard this week. I'll either play him or bench him. But for 34, he has to go, because I want to get Salah in that team. And if Fernandes is out, I'll probably go for the double game. We can just get Grealish instead. So I still really like Odegaard, Martinelli and Saka, but I think it's probably time to get rid. Most people probably don't have a forward. In terms of the defenders, it's maybe a little bit different, because generally it's easier to bench defenders because we want to play 3-4-3 or 3-5-2. But again, they don't have, especially for the defenders, they don't have great fixtures. Like you could see Newcastle, Man City, Chelsea and Brighton all scoring. And also, as far as we know, Saliba is still out. So that's not helping the Arsenal defence either. So they're still good options. Some of us might still want to bring them back in game weeks 37, 38, etc. But for now, they've kind of done their job, and it's time to start thinking about different players with double game weeks instead. So what's the best strategy if we still have our wildcard and free hit chips, but are fairly happy with the game week 33 team? Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you are happy with a team, you don't need to wildcard this week, but I would probably use it in game week 34. I don't really see too much reason to save it beyond that. I can't imagine there's loads of you out there with such good teams that you can't get any benefit from a game week 34 wildcard. You're going to get some benefit even if it's small, and that wildcard in 34 is easily going to cover you for the double in 34, the double in 36 and the double in 37, and most of those teams you'd be looking to target also have pretty good fixtures in game week 35. So I think wildcard in 34 makes a lot of sense, but then the question is, when do you use the free hit? Because unless there's loads of injuries and suspensions, your team's going to be fine for those double game weeks. And game week 35, there's probably not a huge benefit. So I think at that stage, I would probably save it until game week 38, which I know sounds a little bit crazy, but I've even seen people like Ben Crellin thinking about this, and they wildcarded, I don't know the exact week, but I think it was game week 26 or 27, maybe 28. So they've already wildcarded a while ago, and he thinks that he can cover 34, 36 and 37 fairly easily with the amount of transfers he's got. And as we know, he's the fixture kind of guru, right? He's always thinking about future plans, in which case there's no time to free hit. So he's probably going to save it for 38. And I do kind of like the idea of doing that. Most of the time during the season, I'll always find another week which I think is more beneficial. So I've just used mine in 32. But I do like the idea of using it in 38. And the main reason is all the games are on at the same time. Now, don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean we're going to get the lineup for every single team. But the amount of team leaks is much higher. If there's any injury news or stuff like that, journalists just seem to be a little bit more willing to come forward with that. Sometimes managers talk about players that are going to play as well because it's the last game of the season, stuff like that. So, for example, I think it was last year, Scott Carson, which is why, by the way, that's who that is, by the way, in the middle, for people that don't know. Scott Carson at Man City, he was played in one of the games towards the end of last season because they wanted to get him on the pitch because Pep was so happy with what he'd done to help with training and stuff throughout the season. And if you think about possible differentials, obviously most people are still going to have Haaland if he's going to start for Brentford away, but what if he's got a slight injury? What if they're going to rotate him and you find that out because they got an FA Cup final and the league is already wrapped up, whether it's gone to Man City or Arsenal? Well, suddenly you can get Alvarez in. Maybe Zaha's back from injury. He's got a home game against Nottingham Forest, decent. Okay, Son's not been a great option all season, but a final game punt against Leeds away could be worthwhile. What if, I don't know, Martial's going to start and he's actually fit, and you haven't wanted him because, you know, he gets injured all the time, but it doesn't matter now. It's just a one-game week punt. What if Darwin's going to start? Nobody's got him because they've just got Salah, Trent, maybe Gakpo, maybe Jota, but you know he's starting against Southampton. Another one-week punt. Lots of us have got rid of Arsenal players. What if you want to get double or triple Arsenal back for Wolves at home? There's lots of options there that you could go for. So, honestly, if your team's fine for 33, I'm wildcarding in 34. I'm using that for 4 game weeks, 34, 35, 36, 37, getting the doubles out of the way, and I'm just going to have a fun free hit on the last day of the season. The only thing I would say is there's a lot of information to take in towards the deadline, right? Because you're waiting for that team news. So you've got to have a few different scenarios planned out for how the team's going to look, and if X player starts or doesn't, what are you going to do instead? But outside of that, I think it's a pretty fun week to use it. So can you talk about the benching dilemma for those of us with double Brighton midfield? For example, I've got 2 Brighton mids, Rashford, Fernandes and Grealish. Now, to be fair, in this particular scenario, Fernandes is a doubt for game week 33, so I would just bench him and play the other 4. But when I was going through the questions for this video, there were lots of different variations of benching headaches, especially with midfield. So that's what I'm going to quickly talk about. Essentially, the graphic you see at the bottom, the further you are to the left, the least likely I would bench that player. So because Mitoma is left of Grealish, if the choice is between Mitoma and Grealish, I would bench Jack Grealish. Similarly, if it's between Rashford and Saka, I would bench Saka. So hopefully that makes sense. Salah, definitely the number 1. If you've got him, you play him. I think Rashford, given that he came through 120 minutes, is very likely to start against Spurs. And I think right now, Spurs maybe not in the greatest place. I don't think Man United are going to go and score 5 or 6 goals, but I do think they'll score. Then it's any of the Brighton midfielders with Nottingham Forest away. Again, I'm not too worried about the fact that they had so many minutes in the FA Cup semi-final. For me, the hardest part is then the Arsenal and Man City midfielders. Now, I absolutely think that Jack Grealish is going to start that game, so I'm not really worried about that. I know I've mentioned the fact that at some point he might get benched. That could happen, but it's not going to be against Arsenal at home, I don't think. I've got Saka ahead of him because Saka is the penalty taker, and I find it really difficult to bench penalty takers. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I don't like doing it unless I absolutely need to. So I'd probably play him ahead of Grealish, but I do think there's a case to be made that because Grealish is at home, and because maybe Man City are in a better place than Arsenal right now, he could be played ahead of any of the Arsenal mids. The one thing I would say is don't kind of mix up results and FPL potential, because yes, Arsenal have not had 3 good games now, right? 3 draws in a row for a team that's trying to win the title. Not ideal, but they have continued to score goals in each of those games, 7 in total. So I don't think, as good as the Man City defence is, it's going to get a clean sheet. So if you wanted to play Martinelli ahead of Grealish, then absolutely you should go ahead and do that. I wouldn't say that this order is, you know, one of those situations where Salah is miles ahead of Rashford, who's miles ahead of Mitoma. And especially when you start getting to the end, like Saka is definitely not miles ahead of Grealish, and Grealish is definitely not miles ahead of Martinelli. But if you're looking at midfielders, this is the rough order of who I would bench, starting with the best options to play on the left, the worst options on the right. All right, let's quickly talk about my team. Now, I did do the team selection video yesterday, but obviously the big thing that's changed is Bruno Fernandes is now flagged and a serious doubt for that Spurs game. And you might say he was always going to be a doubt for that game, which is fair enough. But when you see the picture of the boots and the crutches, it does make you worry a little bit more. Now, originally, I talked about moving early because of price changes to do Kane to Greenwood and Odegaard to Salah, and I was going to play a 3-5-2 this week. And the reason that I needed to move early, because I only had 0.1 million for my planned moves, and Salah was going to go up in price and Chilwell was going to go down. So I was going to get Salah before the rise and then do Chilwell to Trent for game week 34. But once I saw that image of Fernandes, he then became much more of a doubt in my eyes for 33, but also 34 as well. And if I do end up selling Fernandes, money isn't such an issue for that Chilwell to Trent move. And I think sometimes you've just got to give yourself that little bit more thinking time rather than rushing into a move. So if I'd done Kane to Greenwood, Odegaard to Salah, then that would have left me with still Fernandes in my team. And okay, if he doesn't play Spurs, I just get Botman off the bench. And maybe that's not the end of the world. But I just didn't want to do it in case I thought of a better plan today, right? And also, I don't necessarily think that Kane to Salah is worth a hit this week. And I know some people have said to me, well, if you're going to do it in 34 anyway, why not just do the hit this week? And that does make a lot of sense. But also, between 33 and 34, other stuff could happen, right? What if Salah gets injured and then I need to keep Kane and get someone else instead? Obviously, it's very unlikely, but these things can happen, right? Bruno Fernandes has barely missed a day's worth of football because of injury, and all of a sudden he's now a doubt for game week 33, which we weren't expecting, right? Maybe Rashford was going to be out, fair enough, but never Bruno Fernandes, and that has now changed. So that is why it's not always worthwhile bringing a hit forward, although I probably would have done it last night had we not had the Fernandes news. So now it's a case of, well, what do I do? Part of me is tempted just to roll because I'm already priced out of that Trent move now, and if next week I move on Fernandes and I've got the money to do it, if not, I'll just think of doing something else instead, and I'll just play Fernandes, hope that he's fine for Spurs away, and if he's not, I just wouldn't expect him to come off the bench. I think he's either going to start or not be in the squad at all, and having Odegaard come off the bench is not ideal, but I feel like a lot of other people have got Grealish in that situation, and I like Grealish. But is he so much, is he up here while Odegaard is down here? Probably not. So I don't think it's the end of the world. The other thing is, it just doesn't feel like it makes sense to move Odegaard before Fernandes. So I could do Fernandes to Salah. I'd still have to get rid of Kane though. And a lot of people would say go to Isak, but I can't afford that if I also want to do my moves next week. So if I just run through some scenarios, if I do Fernandes to Salah, and this probably works even less now because Salah's gone up in price, and I do Kane to Isak, let me just check it. I think I'm priced out anyway. Yeah, I still can't do Chilwell to Trent. I'm 0.1 million off. And again, maybe I should have just done this move last night, but I wasn't all that comfortable doing it. So instead, I would probably go to Solanke. That would give me the money to get Trent for Chilwell. And then I'd also have 1.1 million to change Odegaard. So that is what I'm now thinking, right? I think the main two moves for me are either roll and just hope for the best. And I have said in game weeks 30 and 31, I was expecting a small red arrow. I could get a red arrow this week, the way things are looking. So either roll and just hope for the best, and then either take a -4 or a -8 in game week 34. Or I just do the two moves this week, Solanke in and play him ahead of Odegaard. And obviously I'd bring Salah in for Fernandes. And it's always been my plan to get Salah for 34 anyway. And then in game week 34, I can still do the Trent and midfield move, and then I would just get Grealish instead. So I'd take a -4 this week and a -4 next week. But in that case, if I'm not completely sure, I might as well just leave myself open to a -8 next week. And if Fernandes is fit, I'd want to keep him, and I would just probably go without Trent instead. So that's where my dilemma is. I know to some of you it probably sounds really obvious, just take the hit, but I don't think it is as obvious as that, because I'm just not as sure about Grealish as everyone else. I think he's a really good option, right? And once I get past my kind of Salah, Rashford, triple Brighton, and Fernandes if he's fit, Grealish is my next preferred option, but I don't think he's in my top 5 unless Fernandes is out. So that's why I don't want to commit to doing that, because I think Fernandes going forward, if he's fit, is a really good option. And he is somewhat of a differential now because people are sick of him because he's not returned. And now you've got the injury doubt. It just makes me want to have him in my team even more. So I don't know. Right now, if I had to guess, I think I'll probably pull the trigger on getting Salah in for Fernandes. But I think there's every chance I roll as well. Anyway, I'm just rambling now, so I'll leave it there. I don't think there's any other moves that I want to make. It's either Salah in for a hit, or it's roll and hope for the best and reassess ahead of Game Week 34. If you enjoyed that video, give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Deadline stream starting at 4:30 today UK time. Do not miss the deadline. It's 6 PM UK time. I'll catch you later.